Howdy everyone and welcome to the Serial Geek TV YouTube channel. My name is James Eatock and today I present to you something special. Back in 2003 to 2006, I was a co-producer on the UK He-Man and the Masters of the Universe DVDs produced by Contender and Cheerful Scout. For one of the special features, I conducted an interview with Filmation storyboard artist and writer Robert Lamb. Well over 1.5 hours worth of footage was shot, but for the DVD I edited the interview down to roughly 40 minutes. A while back I mused that showing Rob's interview in all its glory with new accompanying visuals would be a rather wonderful addition to this channel. Fans of animation and the history of Filmation will love this, given that Rob thoroughly enjoyed his time at Filmation and had much to say. This is the first part of the interview recorded back in 2004. Enjoy!
My name is Robert Lamb. I am a storyboard artist, writer, animator. I worked at Filmation Studios from mid-1981 to the beginning of 1989 when the studio closed down. I was there at the beginning of He-Man and worked through both seasons of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, as well as She-Ra, Princess of Power, and a number of other series there. I started with Filmation in 1981 as a storyboard apprentice. It was my first break in the animation industry, and it was unusual in that the normal course was to start out as an in-betweener, assistant animator, and work your way up, maybe go through the layout department, and then move into storyboard. But at the time, they had a shortage of qualified storyboard artists, and I lucked out. I managed to get in at that time. I was given a test, a Lone Ranger script. Normally, they would have a prospective artist storyboard out the entire page of script, but Carl Gears, who was the storyboard supervisor at that time, just gave me one line to do. I believe it was a farmer was about to lose his farm, and the Lone Ranger had to give the guy the bad news. And the line that I had to illustrate said, the farmer's shoulders slump in resignation. Now, I was given a couple sheets of storyboard paper and that line of script, and Carl Gears, who later went on to start Disney TV animation in the mid-80s, he said, just give me as many different views as you can of this one shot. Sounded simple enough, so I took that home and proceeded to board out about 9 shots. At that time, the storyboard pages were 8.5 by 11 with 9 panels per page, very small, and I thumbnailed out 9 different poses. I had things like a wide shot of the Lone Ranger and Tonto and the farmer on the front porch, and he's, the Lone Ranger is leaning against the post and the farmer is sitting down like this, and I had close-ups of him wringing his hands, of him feeling this way, and I thought posed it inside next to the fireplace in the farmhouse, and I came up with 9 different poses in about 20 minutes, and I thought, there's no way I can get a job with that. So I boarded out another 9 poses, so I had about 18 poses for that one line. And I called Carl back and said, I'm done, shall I bring it in? And he said, no, I can't see you today, bring it in tomorrow. So I came in the next day. He took one look at it and said, you're hired. And I was floored. He said, you're kidding. He said, no, the most I've ever gotten from that assignment was 3 poses. You gave me 18 poses. And I didn't think it was enough. Then Don Christensen, the producer, came in at the time, and he said, this is the guy I was talking to you about. And Don looked at my sample, and he said, well, the guy sure knows film and storyboarding. Too bad he can't draw. Oh, goodness, I thought I was going to die. I'm 25 years old, my first break, and here the producer was saying my drawing was not up to snuff. Then he said, well, it's up to you, Carl. Hire him if you want to. And Don left, and Carl said, I'll tell you what, you put me in a bit of a quandary. Your drawing is not quite up to our standards, but you really understand film and editing and cutting and composition and such. I'll tell you what, we'll put you on a 2-week probation, and you can assist some of our journeyman storyboard artists. And if at the end of 2 weeks you're coming along, we'll keep you on for the season. Well, that was just terrific. I started the next Monday and assisted other artists, Don Manuel and Charlie Howell and some others at the time, working on Black Star, the animated Shazam, and Hero High. And I was on pins and needles for those first 2 weeks. I thought, I have no clue how I'm doing. Am I doing well? Am I doing poorly? What am I going to do? So on Friday of the second week, I walked into Carl's office and said, well, do I come back on Monday? And he looked at me like I had two heads and said, what are you talking about? And I reminded him of the probation thing. He goes, oh, don't worry about that. If you had been in trouble, you would have known a long time before that. You talk about wave of relief. And so I was on for the 1981 season. I guess it started back when I was about 14, 15 years old. I saw a re-release of Disney's Sleeping Beauty. Though the story was a old-fashioned fairy tale, what blew me away was the animation, the stylized backgrounds, the special effects that were done. It was a lot different and a lot better than the TV animation that I'd seen, and it really caught my interest. It helped focus me and my path along art lines. Now, I went back and forth, tried different things, explored different avenues, but I found I really had a heart for animation. I also wanted to get into to the motion picture industry and move forward in that direction. And for that, I went to Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California, and Otis Art Institute, and learned life drawing and so on. I tried to get on at Disney, but every time I went there, they weren't hiring, or my work was not quite up to snuff. But I kept trying and going back and trying and going back. And I got an opportunity. I met Robert Klein, who was a top storyboard artist, and I think he was a supervisor at this time, at Filmation. This would have been 1980. And he encouraged me to, check them out. And what I had done was sketch out some storyboards made up a story of a Star Wars style space battle, and that's what I took in to show Carl Gears, which I mentioned earlier. The two things that I did at Filmation were storyboarding and writing. I did storyboards for first and second season of He-Man, and then about halfway through the second season, I wrote some freelance scripts for He-Man and was invited to join the writing staff. So I moved from the storyboard department to the writing department and wrote scripts for the second half of the second season of He-Man and all of the first season of She-Ra. Television animation in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, in all the studios, they were limited. All the work was done in the United States up until the 1980s. Hanna-Barbera had a huge staff, and there were other studios that had smaller staffs, but they pretty much did all the work in this country. The exception being Jay Ward with the Rocky and Bullwinkle series, and George of the Jungle and Dudley Do-Right and all those. That animation was produced in Mexico. But Hanna-Barbera, the Flintstones, Jetsons, Johnny Quest, all those shows, and all of the Filmation material was produced in the United States. In order to do that, there were cost-cutting measures done. Repeating backgrounds, when Fred Flintstone runs by a palm tree, he runs by the same palm tree over and over and over again. Other things were to limit the range of animation, where you'd walk a character into a scene, he'd stand there, and then just the mouth would move, and the eyes would blink. And that would save production cost, less drawing, less painting of cells, and so all the studios participated in some form of economical production. It was the only way to produce on the budgets that they had. Filmation kept the work in the United States the longest. Other studios were starting to send their work overseas, first to Japan, and then to Korea, Taiwan, China, Philippines, a lot of different places. And what they could do was, for the cheaper labor, they could raise the bar as to the amount of animation that appeared in any particular episode. And so the overall look was better, and the costs were about the same, and sometimes even a little lower. And one by one, the different studios followed suit, to the point where Filmation was the last studio that had a complete production team in the United States. So everything from script through animation, background painting, cell painting, camera work, editing, everything was done under one roof. Filmation's way of cutting costs was to devise a stock animation system. It would happen during the off-season while they were preparing for a show to get started. Before they could call back all the animators, the scripts are being written, characters are being designed, and so they would keep some of their key animators employed, creating stock walk and run cycles, dialogue poses, and things like that. Things they knew they would use over and over and over again, and they could justify keeping those people on the payroll. Then it was anticipated that a certain percentage of all the animation would be reusable stock animation, and then a certain amount would be newly created for that episode. There's a lot of pressure to keep the costs down because of what was happening with the other studios sending all their work overseas. So Filmation emphasized, the producers emphasized the need to keep those budgets down, because each season could be the last one in which we all had jobs. So there was a great desire to keep things economical, on budget, so that we could stay in business the next year. One of the things that I really appreciated about Lou Scheimer, the president of Filmation, was that his philosophy about business was different than other CEOs. Other places was to make the most profit with the least costs. With Lou, his emphasis was do whatever he could to stay in business and keep as many people employed as possible. And we really appreciated that. There was always a dynamic tension between the front office wanting to keep costs down so we could turn enough of a profit to open the doors next year, and the production side, everyone from writers and storyboard artists and directors, animators, background painters, everybody really wanted to do the best job they could. We tried to, push the edges, take it a little further, get a little bit more bang for the buck, but still realizing that we were having to keep things economical. I know from a viewer standpoint, you'd watch an episode of a typical He-Man, and you'd say, "Oh, well, there's He-Man punching the camera again, and here's He-Man lifting a rock and pitching it again, and here's He-Man walking in the same way every time." And the stock system did hurt the overall viewing of each series because of that. And even little kids could recognize that they're doing that same thing over again. I saw that yesterday. And we really wanted to do better. At a certain point, some of us in the storyboard department were noticing that some of the original animation in a particular episode was much better than an individual stock scene that did kind of the same thing. So we started cannibalizing from other episodes that were not part of our stock system, but was a good scene. Maybe it was a battle scene or some bit of animation that just looked really good. I said, boy, I wish I had that instead of this stock scene to use. So we started developing a supplemental system that we called Same As. This scene is the same as episode 3. And we would reference it in the storyboard so that the director could pull the scene and look at it and see if it'll work for him and insert it, and thereby saving redundant animation. Our goal was to save more money, increase the amount of stock scenes and reusable scenes that we could do, so it wouldn't be the same thing over and over again, but there'd be a broader range. But also, what we were hoping for and what we pushed for was for the directors and the animators to take the animation another level better, increase the amount of motion, increase the amount of acting, because there was a very good opportunity that we could reuse that again, as opposed to it just being used once and never seen again. And over time, it really started with He-Man, but over time, the show started looking better because we had a wider range of material to choose from, and the animators were encouraged to on the new scenes that they had to create to take it further and make it better. And so we worked with the limitations that we had. You know, we wish that we could have had brand new material every time and just had it look as rich as we could have. But at that time, in the mid-1980s, we were battling for our own survival. And eventually, just before Filmation closed, we ended up, we started making arrangements, at least for the ink and paint, to be done overseas. And I know that it was a very painful thing for the powers that be at Filmation do. Lou Scheimer grieved over it a lot. He had people there in every level of production that had been with him for 25 years. And he couldn't stand the idea of sending the stuff overseas. In fact, in 1982, the Animators Union went on strike to protest runaway production, overseas production, to keep things here in the States. And Lou Scheimer actually came out and picketed his own company. I mean, there were picket lines around Filmation, as there were around every studio. And he came out and picketed his own company because he believed so deeply that we needed to keep the work here in this country to preserve the domestic industry. So I really respected him for that. And, you know, as much as I wanted the animation, the programming to be the finest and comparable to what everything else was, the fact that we could keep our friends and a great team employed was a higher priority. Now, as it turns out, in the years following He-Man, we had a period of time where we were very profitable, and we started venturing into feature films, and we were stretching ourselves. And each series following He-Man was better and better and better. And it's a shame that we shut down in 1989. The parent company closed us down just a couple of years before there was a big boom in animation in the 1990s. And it was a shame because all that talent at Filmation went to other studios and became directors and lead animators and produced some very fine things, working in Disney feature films. Tom Cito, who was a fellow storyboard artist, went on to be a director at Filmation and then went over to Disney and was a directing animator. Vicki Jensen, who was in storyboard, is now over at DreamWorks and is the director for Shrek and Shark Tale. There was a lot of fine talent, and the only thing holding us back were the economic limitations that were put on us by trying to stay alive and viable.
To be continued.